Okay, Mr. Watson here, and in this video, we're going to look at discrimination at the Olympics. Now, specifically, what we're going to look at is the changing role of women throughout the Games. As we know from earlier in the year when we were covering psychology about attitudes, prejudice, and this come up about having thoughts about specific things without all the correct information, etc. So we're going to look at the changing role of women throughout the Olympic Games and the introduction and importance of the Paralympics. So as we know, the first modern Olympic Games in 1896 Athens, the start of bringing peace and harmony around the world. Pierre de Coubertin was criticised because women were not given the opportunity to participate in the Olympic Games. Okay, so he was criticised for that, and rightly so. So our starting point of the modern Olympic Games, there were no place for women, continuing from the ancient Olympics. 4 years later, women entered the Games, and there were golf and tennis that women were allowed to participate. Okay, and an American lady named Margaret Abbott won the golf competition. However, rather than receiving a medal, she was given a porcelain bowl. So this comes back to that prejudice, that discrimination, the attitude that a woman wouldn't want a medal, would give her a porcelain bowl. Okay, so there's still issues, even though we now have women at the Olympics, which is a positive step, although it was only 22. Then you go and ruin it with the prize you're giving. So a little bit of progress, but not much, to be honest. 1904, okay, we had the introduction of archery. However, tennis and golf were not deemed as proper events, and archery was the only legitimate event you were allowed to participate. So it was almost like a backward step. But this time, they were awarded medals, and Matilda Scott Howell became the first American woman to win a gold medal. In fact, she won 3. So this is at the St. Louis Games. We mentioned this in the As a Social Force video when the World Fairs was going on, and there was also criticisms of this Olympics. It went on too long. People weren't even aware they'd won. But it was good that we now had women receiving gold medals, but still not enough events and not enough women at the Games. Moving on, and this was where the Winter Games were introduced, and obviously the Winter Games are now successful. They have their own separate event, held in the same year of the regular Olympics. There was a place for women at the Games, but again, this attitude that will only let them participate in figure skating because it's one of them sports with that aesthetically pleasing look. We still got issues. We're making steps, but then almost like they're shooting themselves in the foot with the restrictions they put on. Okay. Now, a very influential woman, Alice Milliat, okay, she started organising football matches with England and France, and she was involved in pushing for women to be participating in sport. And was working a lot with the International Women's Sports Federation. And what happened, they started the power struggle as Alice's events started picking up traction, and there were women Olympiads organised from 1922 to 34, and the Olympics were not liking that. They were like, can you change the name of it? Etc., etc. But Alice was pushing for what she wanted was more sports and events for women to participate in the Olympics. And as a result, the Olympics slowly became more feminized, but there was still gender imbalance throughout the 20th century, including in the build-up of the IOC, which we'll come on to in a bit. But Alice Milliat, very influential, getting more events for women at the Olympics. And this started in 1928 when women could participate in track and field, and Elizabeth Robinson there on the screen was the first woman from any country to win a gold medal in a track and field event. So a big moment for women at the Olympics, okay, through the influence of Alice Milliat. It's also important to know, now while 10% is not a lot, it has doubled from the 5% that were participating in the previous game. So we're now up to 10% in 1928. We then had World War II, and then we had the return of the games in 1948. And why I've picked this slide is because it showed that we had places for different culture, different races, people of colour, and this lady here, Alice Coachman, won a gold medal for the high jump, and it was the first woman of colour to win an Olympic gold medal from any country. So another big moment for equality. So a really good moment. Then let's jump forward all the way to 2012, because we could pick moments like this throughout, and then I'll end up making a video that is far too long. So London 2012, we were starting to even the odds, so 44%. So if we think back to 10% in 28, on the world scale now, 44% of women participate in the game. So we're starting to balance this out, okay? And at the time in London, it was the highest percentage to date. Rio did go further, which we'll come on to, but this was a big moment, okay? Women's sport, women's athletics finally on the rise, and they were getting the representation they deserved in the events at the Olympics finally. Also, this was the first Olympics in London 2012 where every participating nation sent a female athlete. So some refer to this as the Women's Games, and this contributes, going back to the economics and commercialism, but another reason why London was known to be a very successful Olympics. 4 years later, winning big, Team USA sent 555 athletes to compete in Rio, and the women outnumbered the men. I also believe the women outnumbered the men in London too, the American team. But the reason I picked it for Rio, this is the highest number of women to compete for any team in Olympic history. 291 women in one team. It's remarkable. And as a result, they brought home 65 medals. You know, you give them the opportunity and they'll deliver just like any athlete. Okay? And two athletes there, both winning 5 medals, making this an extraordinary year for female athletes. And the percentage had gone up from London from 44 to 45.2%. So again, trying to even this out. So let's just look at the main points of what we're trying to look at through the women's role in the Olympics. And we have rising participation. So from the start of the modern Olympic Games up until now, participation numbers have gone up. Okay, so Tokyo was dubbed to be going to be around 48.8%, but obviously Tokyo hasn't happened, so officially Rio is our highest so far with 45.2%. However, if we go to the Youth Olympic Games and female participation at there, in Buenos Aires we had 49.7%. So the most even the Olympics has ever been, being in the Youth Olympic Games. So we're still waiting for the Adult Olympics and particularly them Summer Olympics to reach them numbers. So the key point here is that throughout the years, more women have participated in the Games. Sport events have also increased for women throughout the Games. So obviously, as you know, we start with tennis and golf, and then archery was the only recognised, and then etc., etc. And now the idea is, okay, if you're trying to introduce a new sport to the Olympic programme, it's required that women's events must be available in that sport, okay? And the IOC are becoming a lot better with working with international sports federations, women's commissions that they've created, athletics commissions involving women. It's becoming much better, and they're trying to stimulate women's involvement across lots and lots of sports. Okay, and then we mentioned on one of the slides the IOC had an imbalance. And as of January 2019, 33% of IOC members were women and 30% being IOC executive board members. When all of this started, I believe there were only 2. Okay, so it's a lot better. So we've got more women involved in the administration in the IOC. We've got more women participating in the games, and we've got more events for women at the Olympics. Okay, and also to note, the IOC every 4 years organises a world conference on women in sport, and every year there's a women in sport trophy awarded for the development. Okay, so they're aware, they're responding to their criticisms, and they're trying to balance all of this out, and rightly so. Okay, so there are our main points on the changing role of women in the games. So now let's look at the Paralympics. Okay, again, when we talked about attitude and I was putting them pictures in the video, okay, there was this prejudice and this attitude that disabled people could not participate in sport, okay, before World War II. So this attitude, okay, it's like a limiting belief and it shouldn't occur. So we had no Paralympics or disabled athletes participating in the games, but that was all about to change. So after World War II, okay, 1948, Sir Ludwig Guttmann organised a sports competition involving World War II veterans. That's why World War II has a key moment in this. Their veterans had spinal cord injuries, and Sir Ludwig, he organised a sports competition in Stoke, England for them to participate. Okay, so a big moment. Now, no one was quite sure how to take this. Okay, so this event was through the doing of Sir Ludwig Guttmann, and he was a German neurosurgeon, and he fled Nazi Germany. He was working at Oxford University, but he left there to take control of the national spine injuries, hence why his first sports competition was for spinal cord injury patients, or should I say World War II veterans. Now, like I said, not many knew what to do. 4 years later, he organised the competition again, and a team of wheelchair athletes from the Netherlands came to the competitions, and this gave the games international status. This was what giving it the impetus. It was giving more attention to the games, and the competition in 1952 had 130 participants. So this was growing, okay? And then came the question, should disabled athletes be allowed to participate in the Olympics, okay? A good question, and yes, they should. So growing in popularity from Sir Ludwig's event, we had the first Paralympic Games, which was held in Rome, Italy in 1960. So moving in the right direction, but quite similarly to the women, it was happening in small numbers, but we were making progress. Following the Tokyo 64 Games, the Paralympics were held in different cities, okay? So a bit like this, by meaning in different cities, that doesn't mean we have a different host city every time. It actually meant that the Paralympics were not held in the same city as the Summer Olympics. Okay, so we've had the introduction of the Paralympics in the Winter Games, okay, which is a good thing. But the Winter Games and the Summer Games, they were held in different cities to the regular Olympics. So we still had questions here. Is that right? They're all athletes. They should be celebrated equally. So then we had the significance of Seoul. 1988, this all changed, okay? So the Paralympics took place just after the Olympic Summer Games, and they were held in the same venue. So this was a big moment and a great decision from Seoul to do that. And Albertville in 92 had also followed suit, and the games came together in the winter and summer. So Seoul 1988, a big moment for the Paralympics being held in the same venue. Okay, and then in 2001, there was an agreement between the IOC and the IPC, okay, of one bid, one city, so equal opportunity. This was to become a thing now, and let's put it in writing as part of the charter, okay, that we have equal opportunity and we will have the games being held in the same city. So if you bid to host the Olympic Games, you're going to host the Paralympics too. And then again, I've skipped forward a few years, and again to highlight, like the women, how much the rise in participation has changed throughout the Paralympics. So in Rio 2016, we had 4,328 athletes from 159 countries. And let's think back in 52 with Sir Ludwig's event, we had the Netherlands and England. So this has grown fantastically. Okay, 22 sports now. Okay, we had an independent Paralympic athletes team featuring 2 refugees, more equality. Okay, and the games made TV numbers. 4.1 billion people tuned in across 150 countries, and 2.5 million tickets were sold. So you can pause and take the numbers there, but this slide is just highlighting the impact and the rise of the Paralympic Games. Okay. We also had development of new technology. I mean, if you think back to the picture I showed you with the artery of the spinal cord injury, and you look at the technology today that the athletes get to use. I mean, so much that CIE want to use it as a reform question is it fair with this technology? Because we had Oscar Pistorius who ran in the Olympics themselves. He was a Paralympic champion, and he was getting times to qualify for the actual Olympics. And he competed in the actual Olympics, but then it raised questions, was the equipment actually putting him at an advantage? Okay, so CIE are using this as a reform question, is that should Paralympians be allowed to compete in the Olympics? And you look at positive, negative, but it's quite great how people are inventing this type of equipment, and it provides so many opportunities for disabled athletes to participate in sport. Just to finish up here, nice little infographic from 64 Tokyo all the way to 2020, which was meant to be Tokyo. We've gone from 21 countries to more than 160. All the way up to Rio, 4,350 athletes. Okay, now there's 500 medals in comparison to 144. It's up to 23 sports. Okay, new events being added year upon year, and now more impairments. We've moved on from just spinal cord injury, and there's now up to 9 impairments included in the Paralympics. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the video. We get the gist of this now. We pause, fast forward, rewind, use it to make your notes. But that's covering the changing role of women in the games and the rise and the importance of the Paralympics, and the importance being it creates that awareness that there should be opportunities for disabled athletes. Okay, people watching the Paralympics, that the mass participation. If you're disabled at home, and that might encourage you and inspire you that actually sport has a place. Okay, so that's the end of the video. Thank you.